Greek syntax, syntax in general, and it can contribute huge, covering several areas of grammatical research, actually the item structure of the verb, the closure structure, order, pronoun, and the way anagram works with interaction with syntax. So this is just some of the topics that we have in the research. But I personally most admire is the work that provides an analytical depth that led to significant contributions to the piano, and with a really broad empirical coverage, starting from phenomenal Greek and testing generalizations across markets. So for this reason, we are very interested to learn more about the current developments in your research, and we are looking forward to enjoying the report of the syntax of Person Case.
Thank you very much, Stavros, and the organizing committee for and the organizers for being so nice and what I want to say is that I'm using a title that I'm very much worried about is the people who think that I come from the 20th century. But I was very happy that I was worked by organized by Marika and Stavros this morning, and I saw that the invitation is used by even other people. So I was that I'm not bad. And what I would like to discuss today is a pathway for syntactic approaches to the person case constraint. Mainly that it arises in both immediate object direct object and direct object indirect object class. And this is a problem for syntactic approaches to the PCC because they provide the syntax to the PCC, and by providing the syntax to the PCC, they also make the prediction that it is realized in one object and not in both objects. I'm going to discuss weak pronoun languages, German versus English, and also Greek languages, French, for instance, or Catalan versus Greek and Spanish. And I will show that the problem arises. I will show that they differ with respect to the order of the weak pronouns or prefix, but they do not differ with respect to the existence of PCC. Now, the literature on prefix and on agreement markers, which is mainly the literature that was looked at the PCC, has not really talked about word order, because in prefix and the agreement markers, it's always possible to resort to the Latin ordering in cases where there is discrepancy between the orders that were predicted and the orders that were actually defined. But for weak pronouns, the Latin solution is implausible. Because weak pronouns have more behavior, a syntactic behavior, and there we would like to use prefixes to derive their order. So it's very crucial that we start from weak pronouns. And in this paper, I will discuss both weak pronouns and prefix, but I will always start from weak pronouns and then go to prefix. In a nutshell, the proposal that I'm going to make is given in 1 and 2. I will follow Richards, 1997, who does not discuss prefix, but discuss other phenomena and other word order phenomena, and has one as a syntax proposed for a movement that is order preserving, and two as a syntax for movement that is order reversing. So in order preserving movement, according to Richards, the two elements move to a single type. The higher element moves first, and the lower element moves second, and taxing the higher element. While when you have order reversal, the syntax that you have is in two, where two heads are targeted. Again, the higher element moves first and goes to the type Y, and the lower element into the second and goes to the third then, and you get order reversal. So that will be my proposal for PCC. No, we did it for the two orders, but it will be shown to be able to derive PCC effect. It's both one and have been actually proposed for the PCC. One is the syntax that I proposed in my work on the PCC, and two, appropriately modified, is the syntax that Plenary recently proposed for the PCC, working out the Jean and Bejer's work. So they have been proposed, but they have not been proposed with respect to word order. They have been proposed as general proposals for the PCC. And the present account is that they are both correct, but they are correct for these two classes. Now, there is an interesting difference between the two patterns, the direct object, indirect object pattern, and the indirect object, direct object pattern, which potentially supports an analysis in terms of 1 and 2, an analysis in terms of 1 head and 2 heads. And this has to do with case syncretism, and comes from an observation by Fabrice Nicole, a historical linguist working on nuance. What he points out is that in the languages he looks at, the clusters that are direct object, indirect object, are always case asyncretic, while the clusters that are indirect object, direct object, show some kinds of case syncretism. And I'm going to relate this generalization to the one head versus two head approach. And at the end, if there is time, I will also discuss some cases where we have order reversal, but in this case, we have order reversal associated with lack of PCC. And there I will say that the syntax is in one head is targeted. And the difference there is that the direct object is first and the indirect object is second, and this is why we don't get PCC. But I do not monitor it. Okay, I will start with the description of the PCC. The PCC is a description against first and second person accusatives in the presence of datives. And it comes in many versions. Here I only mention two, the strong version and the weak version. The strong version is in 3, it says that in a combination of the direct object and the indirect object, basis, agreement, marker, with pronoun, the direct object has to be third person. This version, what it says is that you cannot have a first and second person accusative when there is a dative, regardless of the person of the dative, whether it's first, second, or third. Greek has a strong PCC, so in Greek it's totally ungrammatical to say tu se spione as in 4D, but also it's totally ungrammatical to say sumes suspicion as in 4A. So you just cannot have a first and a second person accusative when there is a dative, and it doesn't matter whether the dative is third person or second person or first person. The weak version is stated in 5. In a combination of a weak direct object and an indirect object, if there is a third person, it has to be direct object. This says that you cannot have a first and second person accusative only if the dative is lower on the person hierarchy, only if it is third person, but combinations between 1 and 2 are okay. Okay, and Catalan has the weak PCC, and combinations like the ones that I give you in 6A and B are okay. What is ruled out is 3, 1, 2. Now, in the past 15 years, people have worked very intensively on the PCC because it was discovered that it's a very, very robust constraint cross-linguistically. It affects indirect objects, direct objects. In some languages, it affects subjects and objects. And it has also been realized that it's possible and desirable to give a syntactic account to the PCC. Prior to these 15 years, people usually treated it as an idiosyncratic morphological constraint. So there are many analyses, and I'm just going to group them here for you because there might be some people that don't know the PCC literature. So there is a group 1 proposals
that is summarized under 7. The tree is in 7. What you have in the tree is an H head. H is for any head, for the head triggering the PCC effects, which could vary from language to language and construction to construction. So this is a head that bears person features, and it tries to enter agree with two lower arguments, and person agree with two lower arguments, a G1, I call it G because it's like a goal. Anyway, G in this case is the indirect object. G2 is the direct object. The direct object is lower than the indirect object, and H is trying to establish person agree with G2, and it can't because G1 intervenes. There are many, many versions of this kind of proposal. My own proposal was that HF is in Cretic languages a transitivity head. In Icelandic, where we find a similar restriction, T or the transitivity head are trying to agree with the indirect object and the direct object. The idea then was that we need to relativize the explanation depending on whether we have a strong PCC language or a weak PCC language. In strong PCC languages, HF, in my proposal, enters person agree with G1, blocking person agree with G2, which can only be a third person because third person lacks a person feature, it only has number, and therefore you don't get to have a violation. But when you have first and second person, then you have a violation. In my work, I said that in weak PCC languages, we have the possibility of having multiple agree. F can enter multiple agree with G1 and G2 with respect to person, but there is a condition on multiple agree which can only, which is in 9, and says that multiple agree can take place only under non-conflicting feature specifications of the agreeing elements. And then I'm assuming that datives have a person feature even when they are third person. It's a minus person feature, and it is in conflict with the first and second plus person feature, and you violate 9. You can have combinations 1, 2, 1, 2 because both are plus participant. You can also have combinations 1, 2, 3 because 3 is 3 accusative lacks a person feature, and you have a split 5 feature checking configuration, just as in strong PCC languages. Nevins also used the syntax in 7, and what he did is he generalized multiple agree to all versions of the PCC, the strong, the weak, the ultra strong, and the me-first languages under what he called contiguous agree. I summarize it here, 11 and 12. The gist of it is that under appropriate relativization of features, all versions of the PCC are derived from multiple agree. It doesn't really matter for the present talk what kind of analysis we want to adopt. Any of the analysis would work for what I'm doing most of the time. Okay? Group 2 proposals are given in 13. The crucial difference between group 2 and group 1 is that in group 2, the head is located in between G1, which is the indirect object, and G2, which is the direct object, and HF enters person agree with G2. That's fine. The problem is that it then tries to agree with G1, and it can't. Okay? Adger and Harbour gave a proposal along these lines, and also a very popular recent proposal on cyclic agree by Bejar and Rezak assume something like that. Finally, there is the proposal by Baker, who takes 7 to be the initial configuration and 13 to be the final configuration after G1 raises to the specifier of this head, which he takes to be the transitivity head. And the problem for Baker is that then HF cannot license the person features of G2, because in order to license person features, you need to have what he calls the structural condition on object on person agreement, which essentially is a spec head configuration, and this is a long distance agree relationship, and it violates his SCOPA. Okay. Now, it is uncontroversial that clitics and agreement markers are subject to the PCC. Bonnet claims that it's universal and very few exceptions have been noted in the literature. What is unclear, though, is the status, generality, robustness of the PCC with weak pronouns, and my theory is that Germanic people don't like clitics, so they don't work on that. So there are occasional claims in the literature, namely that the PCC seems to hold in English based on the data in 16. It seems to hold in Swiss German under certain conditions. It has been assumed not to be operative in Standard German and Dutch on the basis of examples as in 17, A and B. Mich, ihm, fine. Yeah. However, now I'm going to present evidence that German does have the PCC, but only in a very specific syntactic configuration. This is based on work that I did in 2008, where I investigated German clusters and with informants, and I found out that the PCC in German exists, but it exists only with Wackernagel pronouns, and in addition, the subject must follow the weak pronoun cluster. So according to Müller, for instance, the hierarchy of pronouns in German is as in 18, and pronouns falling under the categories unstressed, weak, reduced, undergo obligatory movement to a left peripheral position, which follows C, and is called the Wackernagel position. Wackernagel movement is shown in 19, A versus B. The S weak pronoun needs to move to a position that is next to the complementizer. It's in bold. If you leave it in C2, you have ungrammaticality. The clause, adverbs, and arguments, with one exception, the exception of subjects. Subjects can either precede or follow the Wackernagel cluster, and the relevant data are given in 21. So what we see in 21 is the Frites in dialects that use the determiner before S, before proper names, can either precede S or follow S, okay? On the other hand, if you put a dative or an adverb, and I have a mistake in the glosses, it's yesterday in 21D, below gessen, you get ungrammaticality. So S must be next to the complementizer, and the only thing that can intervene is the subject. Now, Wackernagel pronouns occur in a fixed order. The subject must precede the object, and the direct object must precede the indirect object. And the same order, direct object, indirect object, occurs when the subject precedes the cluster. You see that in 23A. So Fritz, nominative, S, im, and not im, S. Okay, which is ungrammatical. Now, what I did in my 2008 paper was that I tested Wackernagel pronoun combinations with speakers of several varieties of German, and the results that I have are summarized on top of page 8. I found out that Wackernagel pronouns are subject to the weak PCC under two conditions: in individual grammars where the direct object, indirect object ordering restriction is strict, and in addition, when the pronoun combination precedes subjects. So the kind of data speakers reject is given in 24 and 25. Dich, ihm, mich, ihr. Ungrammatical when Maria follows. Crucially, only when the subject follows. When the subject precedes, then such combinations are okay. And you see that in 26A, where the subject is a pronoun, and in 26B, where the subject is a DP. Now, German has the weak PCC. For most of my consultants, combinations of 1, 2, 1, 2 are okay. Dich, mir in 27A is okay. Mich, dir in 27B is okay. And there is a correlation between strict direct object serialization and PCC effects, The speakers that judge 24 and 25 as ungrammatical also judge direct object, indirect object order of pronouns as grammatical and indirect object, direct object orders as ungrammatical. The few speakers that accept 24, 25, I don't think it's correct to say the few speakers, the few of my informants, I think it's like a southern thing. I think Austrian, German, Bavarian, probably have this grammar. So the ones that accept 24 and 25 also accept the two serializations, direct object, indirect object, and indirect object, direct object, and they only show a preference for the direct object, indirect object, but it's not ungrammatical for them. Now, what is the implication of German for choosing, a potential implication of German for choosing among different analyses of the PCC? Well, I'm going to relativize this, but if we assume that the head yielding PCC effects in German is the head that triggers Wackernagel movement, then this head is very high. Based on the subject effect, we can see that it even precedes the subject. Okay, so schematically, I have the structure in 29, where I put dich im offending the PCC before the subject, and dich im not offending the PCC after the subject. This would suggest then that we have two Wackernagel positions, what I call 1 and 2, and the violation happens in 1, and 1 is very high, it's close to the left periphery. So if really this is the head that triggers the PCC effects, then this head is high. But then this means that we can choose among the various proposals, the proposal that crucially relies on a high head, okay? Group 1 proposals, okay? Now, we saw that the PCC arises in German with direct object, indirect object pronouns, but it also arises in English with indirect object, direct object pronouns. And while the site hosting Wackernagel pronouns is high in German, the locus of weak pronoun clusters in English is low if we assume that the verb is VP internal. Okay? If we assume that the verb is VP internal, then weak pronouns show up after the verb. Their order is strictly indirect object, direct object. The data showing that are in 30. Her, it is fine, but it, her is not. Like German, English has the PCC, so me, it is fine, but her, me is not. And English has the strong PCC and not the weak PCC, because you can not say he showed you, me, or me, you, as shown in 32, okay? Now, the comparison between German and English shows that PCC effects arise both when the order is direct object, indirect object, as in German, and when the order is indirect object, direct object, as in English. And this really forces us to think about word order. Why is it that we get it in both orders? Now, the same variation in word order is found in clitic languages. For instance, the order of third-person clitics in French is direct object, indirect object, as in German. This is shown in 33. On the other hand, in Greek, clitics are strictly indirect object, direct object, as in English, and this is shown in 34. Now, in Romance, it seems to be the case that the direct object, indirect object ordering is an old pattern, and the indirect object, direct object ordering is a modern pattern. And most of the languages have shifted from a direct object, indirect object pattern to an indirect object, direct object pattern. But even though clitic languages vary a lot with respect to clitic ordering, what kind of clitic orders they have, and how exactly clitic serialization works, they do not vary with respect to the PCC effects. All Romance languages and almost all clitic languages have them. And Nicole, 2005, who is my source about the historical facts and about the facts in Romance in general, makes this point very forcefully. He studies a wide variety of Romance, modern and older languages and dialects, and shows that they vary a lot with respect to clitic ordering. They do not vary with respect to PCC effects. They vary with respect to what type of PCC effect they have, whether they have the strong, the weak, the mi-first, the ultra-strong. But whatever they have it regardless of order. Now, in all these languages, it seems that the base order of arguments is direct object, is indirect object, direct object, yeah? Perhaps the most controversial case is German, because for German it has been argued that the base order is direct object, indirect object order, but that's not, you know, the common assumption about German. And the unmarked linearization of arguments is as in 35, and people standardly assume an underlying order which is dative accusative, and I will follow this view, which is supported by evidence from scope and variable binding, yeah? Under this view, the surface order of vacant pronouns reverses the underlying order of arguments. And for French, we can make a similar argument. French has been claimed to be underlyingly an indirect object, direct object language, but then the surface order of clitic reverses that when they are third person, and you get the direct object, indirect object order. There is independent evidence against an analysis of accusative dative orders in terms of order-preserving movement, both for German and for French, that comes from constructions where you criticize on a higher verb a subject from an embedded clause and an object from an embedded clause, a dative subject and an object. And you see that, again, the order in both French and German is accusative dative, okay? So no order preserving movement, order reversing movement. On the other hand, in English, we know that the base order is indirect object, direct object, and the clitic order is indirect object, direct object order. So for English, what we want to say is that it preserves the underlying order of arguments. And the same we want to say for Greek. We want to say that it preserves the underlying order of arguments because we see indirect object, direct object mirroring the base dative accusative order of arguments. Now, for all we know, all the languages that have been studied in some detail differ with respect to the surface order, but they do not differ with respect to the underlying order. They are all indirect object, direct object, and that we need to make use of. An analysis in terms of agree would derive that immediately, but also an analysis in terms of move can derive this fact, as I will say now. Now I want to present the core proposal, which I already announced in the introduction. I want to account for the fact that we always have the PCC regardless of order, and the proposal that I want to make is that order-preserving movement has the form in 39. Okay? There is a single head H which is targeted, and an indirect object and a direct object, and the indirect object moves first, and the direct object moves second, and targets that head. And this is what gives you the indirect object, direct object clusters. Yeah? Now, as a first approximation, and I'm going to complicate this, and it's actually something that I'm not certain about. I have to think about it. Anyway, as a first approximation, we could identify, well, we know that this head is the landing side of movements, yeah? No, I'm saying it differently. As a first approximation, we could identify this head with a head that really hosts the clusters, but I'm going to complicate it a little bit. But as a first approximation, we could say that this H head is the clitic position in the IP domain in the case of clitics, Greek, Italian, Spanish, etc. And it is the VP internal position in the case of English if the verb is VP internal in English. Let's now come to order reversing movement. For order reversing movement, I'm proposing the syntax in 40. There are two heads, one H1 head and one H2 head, and H1 attracts the indirect object, and H2 attracts the direct object, and you get the reversal of the underlying order. And again, as a first approximation, we can identify this head and say that it's the head where the cluster appears on. Well, it's the complex, the two heads that the cluster appears on. So I would put then H1 and H2 in what I call the V1 position in German. And I would put these two heads in the position hosting clitics in French and other languages with direct object, indirect object clitic clusters. And for clitics, the type of movement I'm assuming is a head movement type of the Matusansky kind, where first things move like XPs, and then they rebracket and they attach to the head. And this is illustrated in 41. Now, as I already said, derivations 39 and 40 match two derivations that have been independently proposed for PCC effects. 39 is the derivation that I proposed, and there I took H to be the head that really triggers the person restriction effects, not the head hosting clitics. So I took H to be transitive V in clitic languages and T in Icelandic. And I propose that that head bears person and number that probe independently, and then the story about how to derive strong PCC and weak PCC. And we can combine this proposal with the analysis in 39 if we assume that checking and rebracketing merger happens in V transitive, and from that point on, V transitive and the clitics adjoined to it move to the final landing site of clitics, namely T. That's why I said, as a first approximation, and I'm going to qualify that. Alternatively, there is no intermediate step, and we have the landing site being the head that hosts the 5 features, and then it's simpler. And I think that in order to decide that, we have to think about other things. For instance, about the fact that in Romance, at the end, the serialization is person clitics preceding non-person clitics. And maybe therefore we want to say that this intermediate transitivity hat is not really the hat that does the checking, but it does the case checking. Anyway, I mean, for the purposes of what I'm saying here, it doesn't really matter. What matters is that we have this kind of derivation. Yeah? And derivation 40, which yields the other clusters, is actually something that we can propose following Preminger 2014. And modifying Preminger, because Preminger talks about agree relationships, and I want to talk about move relationships. But crucially, in his analysis, which is like an elaboration of Bejar and Rezak, 2003, in his analysis, what you see in 42 is that there is a person head which is separate from the number head. And the idea is that person tries to establish agree with a theme in his story, but the dative intervenes. Then the dative cliticizes. By cliticizing, it's not an intervener anymore. And then, number can establish agree with a theme. The person restriction arises because there is this intervention by the dative in his story. Now we can combine the Preminger analysis with the analysis in 40 if we translate the agree relations into move relations, and if we assume that H1 in 40, the lower head, is the person head, and H2 in 40, the higher head, is a number head. Now, if we have the same dilemma, namely whether the head hosting, finally, the cluster is the head that does the checking relationships or is a lower head. And we can, if we follow Preminger, then we need to put, for instance, for German, the point where the checkings happen in a V-transitive, and then having the Wackernagel movement. And so the derivation you would get would be, for German, would be 43. the indirect object would move to the person head, the direct object would move to the number head, and then from that point on, the order is switched, and then they move to the Wackernagle position in the usual order. I mean, first the direct object, and then the indirect object, and tagging in. Okay. Now, there are two reasons why this one-head versus two-head analysis for the clusters seems attractive to me. One reason has to do with historical change, and the other reason has to do with a pattern that we find with respect to case syncretism. Recall that Vanner and Nicole and all these people have pointed out that the direct object, indirect object pattern is the old pattern, and the other one, the indirect object, direct object, is the new pattern. So under the assumption that the heads relevant for this reversal are person and number, we would start from a syntax that has the person separate from number, and that would give you the direct object, indirect object cluster. And then we would have a stage where the two heads would be fused into one head. So person and number would be fused into a single head, and they would be reanalyzed into one head. And that would cause then the shift from the direct object, indirect object order to the indirect object, direct object order. So this seems reasonable to me, okay? The second reason is that there is a correlation that has been independently noted between order and syncretism. And this has been noted for romance by Nicole, the person that I mentioned before too, Fabrice Nicole, the historical linguist, who looked at many Romance languages and dialects, and he tried to find out what is it that differentiates languages and configurations with direct object, indirect object clusters from languages and configurations with indirect object, direct object clusters within Romance. And he said that the only property that really distinguishes this is what he calls the case syncretism property in 44. In languages with dative accusative clusters, at least one feature of a third-person cluster pronoun is case syncretic. This is the case syncretism property. The way he formulates it is rather obscure, but from the examples that he discussed, these languages either have productive syncretic allomorphs in the plural or employ dative forms for animate accusatives. They have some kind of syncretism somewhere in the paradigm, not across the board, but somewhere in the paradigm. And by contrast, the conservative group has asyncretic clitics, or it employs asyncretic allomorphs in clitic combinations. And even though Nicole only discusses Romance, Greek and German seem to fit his generalization. In Greek, where clitic clusters show indirect object, direct object orders, masculine plural third-person clitics are case syncretic with case syncretic showing an ambiguity between genitive and accusative. I show that on 45. So you have tus, tus, tus in the genitive, and you have tus in masculine accusative. If you look at the determiner system, the genitive plural has a different form than the accusative, ton, 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 tus, yeah? Assume now that you have the following feature specification of accusative and dative in Greek, and here I'm just following, a description by Artemis Alexiadou and Geron Müller. They characterize ton, the plural, as genitive plural, as plus plural, plus governed, plus oblique, and the tus form plus plural, plus governed, minus oblique. What we see then, that's the determiner system, and what we see in the clitic system is that the form of the masculine accusative plural has generalized to the genitive plural. So this suggests that in the clitic system, we have a form, tus, which is underspecified for the plus-minus oblique distinction, and actually we have generalized the accusative for the genitive. Now in German, where clitic clusters are, so we have syncretism and we have indirect object, direct object orders, yeah? On the other hand, in German, where clitic clusters show direct object, indirect object pronouns, orders, third person pronouns do not showcase syncretism, neither in the singular nor in the plural, and this is shown in 48. Now, in the languages that Nicole discusses, there are three groups of languages. There are what he calls the case syncretic group. There is the conservative group. The conservative is the direct object, indirect object, and no case syncretism. The other group is the indirect object, direct object, the case syncretic, and there is syncretism. And then there are some languages which he calls middle group, which have mixed ordering, and also they have a correlation between the ordering and the syncretism. And he argues that the case syncretism correctly distinguishes the different groups. And what is really interesting is that Valkov, who has a recent dissertation on Catalan dialects and does not really discuss case syncretism, he describes several Catalan dialects, and whenever there is, the word order, and he points out that in some languages it's direct object, indirect object, or in some configurations, and then in some other configurations or dialects, it's indirect object, direct object. Every time, this happens, he also mentions that there is some case syncretism. So it seems to me that this correlation is confirmed by this very careful and detailed description of Catalan dialects. And finally, English trivially meets this description because in English we don't have morphological genitive and dative, and we have a strict indirect object, direct object order, okay? So now what I want to do is I want to state the case syncretism property in terms of the one-head versus two-head proposal that I'm making. I'm writing down the case syncretism generalization, which in 50, which says case syncretism arises in languages or configurations where clitics pronouns attached to a single head, and does not arise in languages and configurations where clitics and pronouns attach to different heads. Okay, languages whenever we have a dialect that uniformly shows that, configurations whenever we have a mixed language where it has both. Yeah. Okay. So the intuition that I would like to pursue is that case syncretism is a morphological reflex of a syntactic configuration in which clitics move to a single functional head. And lack of case syncretism is a morphological reflex of a syntactic configuration in which clitics move to two different heads, yeah? So I'm stating that in 51, M case features are syncretized in languages configurations where indirect object and direct object target one and the same case checking head, and are not syncretized whenever they do not. Okay. What is a possible implementation? And here, I'm just giving a possible implementation, and I think I should talk to morphologists. Maybe they will give me better ideas of how to do that. The general idea is that morphological case features are deleted or neutralized in certain contexts, and they can be deleted in local contexts, and attachment to a single head counts as local, and attachment to two different heads does not. That's the idea. And the idea is that there would be something like a rule operating, something like an impoverishment rule that would delete the features. And that rule would operate in very local configurations. So for instance, take the paradigm from Greek that you see in 45. Descriptively, you get you have something like a configuration in 57, you have a head bearing case, person, and number, and you have two elements, a plus plural plus governed plus oblique, and a plus plural plus governed minus oblique. The higher one is the indirect object, the lower one is the direct object. And then the impoverishment rule deletes the plus oblique minus oblique in the context of plus plural, and then under specified twos is inserted. And this is happening in 58. Yeah? This can only happen if the indirect object is in the context of number. That means if number is on the head to which the indirect object attaches. If you have a configuration as in 59, where the indirect object attaches to the person head and the number head is inserted higher, then you don't have the context to do this deletion, okay? So the summary, the interim summary and the final summary, because I will not get to say 5.5, is, well, I might say the word, is that the presence of the syncretism correlates with the patterns and the single head versus two heads proposal, and that's nice, okay. Now, in section 5.5, I have extensions, and I will not be able to discuss them, but I do want to say that this idea of treating nesting in terms of attachment to different heads and crossing in terms of attachment to a single head might be interesting and fruitful also for treating agglutinative morphology versus fusional morphology. So, and here I want to refer to Bantu languages, which are agglutinative, and they always have nesting, okay? And when they allow many clitics, many agreement markers or clitics, which I treat as clitics. So there what you get is something like 61. So you get the lowest object marker to correspond to the highest argument. So 1 to 1, 7 to 7, 16 to 16. And in the syntax that I'm proposing, this means attachment to different heads. And attachment to different heads means no interaction between them, yeah? Because there is no morphological component where things could interact. And that would give you perhaps the fact that the language is agglutinative and not fusional, yeah? Okay, that's one extension. I also wanted to talk about Swiss German, but I'm not going to talk about it because I don't have time. And summarizing, I looked at the relationship between word order and PCC effects. I took as a starting point weak pronouns because they make us think about word order. I addressed a puzzle, namely that PCC effects arise both in direct object clusters and in indirect object clusters and in the other clusters. I followed Richards, who proposed that particular syntax for order preserving, order reversing things, one head versus two heads. I connected that to the case syncretism property, and finally, I said that maybe this way of treating clusters could be useful also for agreement markers and the distinction between agglutination and fusion. Thank you. Stavros?
Yes, thank you. I can't comment on your analysis, but I just had some problems about some of the data.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I may have misunderstood, but starting with English,
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about British English, on page 10,
Mm-hmm.
Examples 30,
Mm-hmm.
31, 32. I mean, you can say in English either he gave me it or he gave it me. Okay, you don't seem to allow for that second alternative.
Sorry?
What I'm saying is that you can have the direct object before the indirect object in English.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably considered to be more standard to have the indirect object before the direct. In other words, he gave me it, but you can also have he gave it me.
Okay, in British English.
In British English.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm talking about American English here.
Oh, but you don't say so.
Okay.
Okay. I'm sorry,
Tell me how the PCC is in British. I mean, tell me whether I know that some dialects of British English have the possibility of having direct object, indirect object, but this correlates with the fact that they can also have it with DPs, as far as I know, from the work by Bill Hadigan, for instance.
No, it's all right. I mean, just to make sure that you were taking that into account.
How is PCC, however, working in British dialects? It works like in American dialects?
I'm sorry, I'm not an expert on these things.
Okay,
I mean,
so
I can't tell you rules. All I know is my own, my own experience of living in British England.
Yeah, so do you have a problem saying something like an indirect object that is third person, for instance, and a direct object that is first and second person? Do you have a problem with that? So something like him, me, he introduced, he described him,
no,
me.
that's to me not grammatical.
Right,
I mean,
okay,
to
fine.
me.
So you have the PCC, regardless.
So it's got to be, okay. But I'm just saying that the order is reversible.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Secondly, with French, am I wrong? But the example in 36 looks as if it's the wrong way round. I mean, native speakers of French will tell us which is correct. This is correct. So the other way around is not correct, you mean? Okay, so it's always le, lui, not lui, le. It's always le, lui, and not lui, le.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, all right. And the last one, forgive me for monopolizing the conversation, but just in the Greek example, which you didn't have time to read, but on page 26, number 67, 68, you suggest there, you say there that stile mastus can be interpreted as having the indirect object before the direct, which is what I would think was normal. But you also say that it can be interpreted in a way such that mas is actually the direct object and the tus is the indirect.
Right. I mean,
now, this contravenes, though, your number 3 on page 2. Where you say that in a combination of a direct object and an indirect object, the direct object has to be the third person.
Okay. I mean, that's the part that I didn't talk about. And it starts from, it starts from Swiss German. And the observation in Swiss German is that you have both orders possible. But you can use, so you can have indirect object, direct object, and direct object, indirect object in Swiss German. And you can use the direct object, indirect object order as a way to circumvent the constraint in Swiss German. So in Swiss German, if you want to say he introduced or he described me to you, not violating the, not having a PCC violation, you use the direct object, indirect object order. Yeah.
I'm talking about the Greek example.
Yeah, but I mean, in order to understand the Greek examples, I have to tell you the story for the Swiss German examples. And there, the story is that I don't have the syntax that I propose for German, but I have a syntax like the syntax that I propose for Greek. So one head is targeted, except that it's the direct object that moves first, and the indirect object moves second. And then, because theoretically this possibility arises, and my claim is that whenever you don't have a PCC, then you have that derivation, and not the German derivation, yeah? And the imperative facts in Greek, according, first of all, these facts are not, established. They come from work by Vina Tsakali and Ken Wexler, and they checked them with informants. And what they found out is that whenever there is case syncretism, you have the data in 67 and 68. And indeed, the fact that according to them and according to their informants, the fact that you can have mas tus Without violating the PCC, so interpreting mas as a direct object and tous as an indirect object, which is not licit, for me that would be evidence that, here Greek patterns with Swiss German and not with Standard German. So it would be evidence that it's not that they move to different hats, they move to the same hat, but in a different order. So it's the part that I didn't talk about. Marika?
Well, rather unsurprisingly, I want to ask you about dialects. So there are discussions of Greek dialects, modern Greek dialects, in terms of the clitic placement. So I was wondering if you are aware of any variation concerning the PCC within Greek dialects, or whether you expect any variation.
I don't know this literature, first. Second, is there variation with respect to the order of the clusters? So is there variation between indirect, I mean, as far as I know, the variation with clitics has to do with whether you have proclisis enclisis or whether you are Northern Greek, Southern Greek. Now, when you are Northern Greek, you cannot form clusters to begin with, and you have to resort to the Southern strategy. So you cannot say ton ton, ton to, you have to say tuto. So I'm not expecting any variation there. In principle, I would, if there were a dialect that reverses the order and and has the direct object, indirect object order, which I don't know if there is a dialect like that, but you would find accusative and dative, like accusative and genitive. In principle, there I would be interested to see what is happening, if it exists. So, because in principle, you could either it could either be a case like Swiss German or a case like German. Now, if that correlated with if this hypothetical dialect was a dialect where it looked as if there is action in the C domain, I might expect it to be like German. If not, then I might expect it to be like Swiss German.
Thanks.
Yeah.
It's mostly a clarification question. See, what I did not understand is that, okay, so you take it that case syncretism means one head, and non-case syncretism means two heads.
Yeah.
How does this relate to the PCC is what? I mean, there is a link
what?
to the PCC.
To the what?
The person case constraint. Yeah. There is a link that...
It doesn't relate to the PCC. I mean, the PCC is derived from the syntax I gave. Okay, the syntax I gave, however, in order for it to be plausible, it would be nice to have some independent evidence. Yeah, otherwise it's just, you know, I mean, I need to, and there is, the claim is there is some independent evidence. And that independent evidence comes from case syncretism. Intuitively, you know, if you attach to two heads, you do not expect that there will be I mean, there are many ways of deriving the case syncretism. And there I really need, first, a morphologist, second, a historical linguist, because we want to know what happened first and what happened second. We want to know, did you have the syncretic forms? And then you had the syntax. Did it start the other way? You started having the syntax and then the syncretism. I still don't know. But the idea is that somehow, you know, when two things attach to the same head, they will end up having similar features. And when they are distinct, then they do not interact. The specific way I did it was not like this. Because if I want to have an impoverishment rule, then the impoverishment rule is always delete features in the context of some other feature. And the context is the plural. So I didn't directly say that they interact the two clitics.
have to go on. So
Okay.
I think that's